Welcome to the Curiosity Solution. I'm your host, Beverly Beal. Join us as we explore the science of curiosity, share stories of people who've used curiosity to improve their lives, and maybe inspire some aha moments along the way. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Curiosity Solution. Today's guest is Megan Nguyen. This amazing human. Well, you know how sometimes you make plans and you think you're meeting with a whole bunch of people, and only one person shows up who turns out to be the best gift you could have ever received in your life. Well, Dr. Megan is one of those people. I met Megan when I was hosting a networking meeting here in Austin, and she was the one who showed up. And through that interaction, I learned so much about, well, just about how I look at the world, how she's looking at the world, how that all kind of interacts and intersects. So Dr. Megan is a PhD, obviously. She works with children, she works with adults, she works with pretty much anybody who really is needing help with the mindset shift. Her company name is so intriguing because I think we're all familiar with the term black sheep, but has coined the term golden sheep. So again, thank you, Megan, for agreeing to be on the show. Um, let's talk a little bit about why you chose life coaching under the name of Golden Sheep Life Coaching.
So thank you for having me. I really appreciate our friendship, and I'm so excited to be here today. But it's interesting because this was the first question that you had asked me after we had met. Why golden sheep? And so I think it's really interesting that we start your podcast episode with this question too. I really actually began with brainstorming business names with how I identify and see the world and my experiences and what led me to getting to that moment of picking a business name to begin with. I grew up in a blend of cultures. I'm Asian American. My parents worked really, really hard. I'm the only child, and Asian immigrant parents. They raised me with really high standards in a perspective that they had adapted within their culture. They came to this country, built a life for themselves, had me. And here comes me, where I'm, of course, part of that world, but also very American as well. And as we all know, what is really American, anyways? The beauty of America is this melting pot of cultures and perspectives. So I always felt like just like this odd black sheep, if you will, in any culture, in any direction that I looked. And even pursuing grad school, I was never the typical therapist. I was never the typical student. So I thought, why, the black and white thinking is just not the way to go, because we're not created as black and white, and we don't operate in the black and white. So life is this big blob of gray. So gray is kind of an ugly color, in my opinion. So I thought, why not choose to be golden? Take the power back, and the polishing doesn't end after you become golden. You still learn, you still evolve. So I thought that's a cool name, Golden Sheep, and it'll start conversations for sure.
Absolutely. Well, the thing that I like about, if you think about gold, again, in the feng shui tradition, anytime you take a raw material, like, like the gold ore, the gold nuggets, you have to add the fire to melt it down in order to create something new, usually jewelry or, teeth. I mean, all kinds of interesting uses for gold. Um,
Yeah.
but the neat thing about it is the transformational ability of gold to take on many forms. It does require fire. It does require heat. And so the more I was thinking about this golden sheep part, it really is all about helping people transform this raw material of their experiences into
Mhm.
something even more refined. Um, so again, kind of coming back a little bit to talking about that immigrant experience. Um, I mean, in some ways, you have the best of both worlds, and almost, the worst at times, not worst, but it's that challenge of taking and honoring the sacrifices that your parents and their family members went through, um,
Mhm.
and finding a way to take that raw material and transform it into something that really is what you need for existing in this culture. Um, can you speak to a little bit of how sometimes that creativity and that creative process, the curiosity of how to combine those, has worked personally for you? And then maybe speak to how you take that, to help others find that curiosity piece of their own?
Yeah. I felt like my entire life has always been the battle of the cultures. It's just been clash after clash. And there were moments where I almost rejected the Asian side of me. And then there were moments where I completely rejected the American side of me. And I think the essence is life's journey is coming to the conclusion that it's not a balance, it's not a fraction, it's a blend.
Mm.
So I think just accepting that I am all of it, and whatever people's cultural, personal, spiritual profile is, it's a blend of everything that you have been and everything that you are and everything that you will become.
Mm. I like
So,
that.
yeah.
So
And
when you're
it's still like a process, like sometimes I think, okay, I got it down and I come home, I speak to my parents or my grandparents and I'm like, well, do I think this way anymore? Or do I want to readapt this perspective again?
Again, coming back to using the metaphor of a sheep, the wool's always growing, and and so you can shear off some of the old stuff, and then new comes on. Um, that's interesting. Again, I'm so those of you who are just listening, you cannot see the difference in the age here. I'm in her parents' age group, and Megan is a freshly minted PhD. So this beautiful young scientist over here, bringing all of her clinical skill set and knowledge to her client base. I have a lot of the wisdom of well, years of that. So let me then ask, in your clinical study here with all of this, Megan, you originally were planning on working more with children. What was it that drew you to working with children, and is that still going to be the main focus of your practice?
Well, I think it was almost by pure interest. I loved the nature of, I mean, I started off in elementary education with curriculum design, and looking at how we can better teach and help kids learn and encode different ways to learn math, for example. And I just was really fascinated by the child brain and how it varies so much developmental stage to developmental stage with a kid. So I was intrigued by that. And then as I evolved into the research aspect, I really liked working with kids on a participant data collection level. They were just so much more fun. Keeping an adult engaged in research is not as fun as keeping a kid engaged. And so I love the imaginative aspect. I'm a huge Disney fan myself. So I think I'm just a little big kid at heart. So that was the initial draw to pediatrics. And then I did a rotation at Texas Children's Hospital and fell in love with pediatric psychology, which was that perfect blend of research, therapy, and just working with people. And as you know, too, working with children does not actually mean that you're working with the kid, you're actually working with a family system. So it was the perfect blend of working with everybody involved, whether it be the caregiver or the child. And so merging into working with adults, as after I completed training and came back here, all of my referrals were adults. And ironically, they were people my age who looked to me to say, you have everything figured out. And I thought I had everything figured out. I reached that milestone. And what's next for me? And, without discrediting my own life journey, I'm like, whoa, I'm so far from figuring out anything because that's the thing you figure out is you'll never have it figured out. You just go along for the ride of life.
So true. I can absolutely speak to that, because, I think I am just when I think I've got something figured out, some new bright shiny object comes zipping along. It's like, "Oh, maybe I need to go explore that." Uh, and that's a challenge. I imagine so when you were working with children, um, because I am very I have enough friends that still have children, that are in that precarious situation between, that cusp of adolescence and adulthood, or, the going through the puberty craziness. I mean, come on, we've all survived it, and I think survive is the optimal word. Um, what advice would you have for really refining, remembering that the childhood wonder, the childhood curiosity?
Mhm.
Would you have any advice for, anybody who's watching or listening on what they can do to almost become give some good life coaching tips for people to give to their inner teen?
I think it starts with allowing yourself to define what magic is for you now,
Mm, I love magic.
because it may have changed. And for me, magic is still going to Disney World, as silly as that sounds. But maybe magic for you is just being able to get off at the time that you say you're going to get off, or being able to really just do nothing in the time that you choose to do nothing in. Or maybe it's having children and being in their presence and knowing that they're healthy and well. So I think just what is magic for you? And the whole idea of why magic disappeared isn't because we grew up and we got all bitter and dark. It's truly because we grew up to be adaptive. And to be adaptive, you have to be protective of yourself. And so as you grow older, you go through different life experiences, both good and bad. And our brain almost encapsulates the make sure that you stay away from these things that can hurt you. And so
Mm.
when we start putting these barriers and blocks up, we close the curtain to all the magic, the darkness too, but also the magic. And so to open that curtain again and reevaluate, okay, what is magic, and where can I see it again, despite the darkness that will always be there.
You just described, what happens when a lot of people end up self-medicating, again, to buffer the pain. They also buffer and, diminish the joy. And, sometimes it's helpful to have what I call spiritual Novocaine, but it's when that becomes a crutch. 'Cause, let's
Yeah.
face it, nobody wants to have a cavity filled without having the shot and without having the gums numb. That's insanity. Um, the, um, the magic the magic, um, at what age did you see the curiosity start to diminish in the children that you were working with when you were doing your clinical rotation?
I always say the first decade or so of a child's life is watching the world around them. What's okay? What's not okay? Oh, that's how you react. Okay, that's what makes mom happy. And then after that point, they start realizing that the world has been watching them. And so it's such an immersive point in this preteen stage where you're like, okay, now I am my body is changing. My emotions are rampant. My amygdala is on fire. And I also everyone's watching me do this thing that I have no idea how to do it and when to do it and all that. And so I think it's not necessarily losing the magic, but I think that race to becoming an adult and figuring things out and thinking that once you're an adult, you have all this like freedom almost, when so far from the truth. I almost feel like we lose magic when we chase something be in that far future and not necessarily look at the magic around us here. So like
Mm,
you're chasing this big oak tree when you're in a field of roses.
yeah, so again, it sounds to me like you're simply, helping people understand how to maintain presence, how to,
Yeah.
be here now, as, Eckhart Tolle has written about and continues to espouse. How hard, though, is that to help a child, a teen, stay present when, let's face it, that soup of
Yeah.
hormones that they're swimming in is not pleasant?
Oh my gosh, by just simply validating that.
Mm,
Because teenagers, I love working with teens or preteens because, as I said, it's that shift of the world has been watching me. And it's so fascinating because they're autonomous enough for adults to expect so much of them, but clearly not enough to be a full adult yet. I mean, some adults even need some support. So I think just validating what they're going through and what they see as their truth is I think is the most important step. Is how are you gonna intervene with something if that person doesn't even feel heard?
yeah. That piece of communication, again, it does not limit itself just to teens. It works
Yeah.
for everyone.
Mm.
Um, have you, I mean, does your background, does your training also include working with people who have had addictive challenges? Or is that a whole separate training?
That's a whole separate training and a whole separate world. It's a whole separate specialty, I would say,
Mm.
as well. But any behavior change, this is again completely different, but it starts with the same. It's looking at what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are, I don't like the word triggers, but what really is the root of the continuous behavior, and what are some barriers and what things have you tried, right? So it starts with that very very basic, again very different, but change is hard at any level. And of course you have the chemical dependency of drug addiction too. But I think it's just hard for humans to change because even you can see a person in the most toxic situation and they choose to stay willingly because the toxic familiarity is almost more comforting than this unknown of what could be. Because could be isn't guaranteed, but this pile of bad that I know it. I know it.
Toxic familiarity. Wow. So, I guess here, let me kind of like take a separate little, like a sidestep over. Why are you calling yourself a life coach versus a psychologist? What is the biggest difference between how you're approaching things in your practice with those two terms? Because, I mean, for a while, for many years, you just had to say, look, I'm a life coach because I know how to give advice. Whereas, you are a doctor, you have your PhD. Um, what was the thinking about between going into the just being a straight up psychologist versus the life coaching?
Everybody asks me that question when I
Yeah.
meet them because it's such an obvious question. So why are you have a clinical training background and yet you're not in a hospital? Why are you a
Yeah.
life coach? And I think my answer was so my story and all of these things, working with kids, working with adults, starting my business, going to grad school, started off with curiosity.
Yes.
And I had so many questions that I wanted to answer using a scientific approach. And so my journey of starting Golden Sheep was because of burnout. I had a moment where I finished residency, I came back to Texas, and this was my point of deciding what my next moves were upon waiting for graduation. And I thought, so burnt out. And it wasn't even 3 weeks where I sat here in the same spot thinking, gosh, I miss seeing patients. And this was me burnt out for 7 years, throw in this whole global pandemic. Like I was done. I was ready to just take a break and just take care of my health, internally and externally. And I thought, man, I miss this. How do I get back to doing that? And so then it almost fell into my lap. All these referrals came in. People were, with that question of, you have your life together, help me. And I said, I don't, but I, I do have this little toolkit over here that I've gathered, that may help. And so the difference between therapy and coaching is there's a place for everything. Everything is needed. Therapy, of course, there's going to be, I mean, depending on what setting you're practicing in, there is a time limit, but it's more processing and focused on criteria for diagnostic purposes. Versus coaching is very solution focused. Can therapy be solution focused? Absolutely, depending on the therapist and what you're trying to do. But coaching is very much, these are the goals. This is how we quantify the goals. Of course, there's an element of processing. And, but it's very, here's our schedule. This is a timeline. We're going to get on the same page. Most of my clients are in therapy and coaching at the same time with me. There's a place, and we don't intersect at all.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
basically are your one-stop shop to mental health and goal achievement.
Right. I don't do therapy because that's not ethical, but I
Oh,
do have therapeutic approaches.
okay.
And I can't
So
not think like a therapist. And so if I have a client who went to therapy and they come with a diagnostic question, I can absolutely answer it. And I can see where their therapist is coming from. I can even walk them through what their therapist is doing with them. And of course, I have so many skills at therapy, and doing diagnostic evaluations has helped me be a better coach in a way too. And again, there's so many unique approaches to coaching that mine is really rooted in my clinical training.
me understand the difference a lot, and I'm sure it will also help others too. Um, the the So it sounds like, when you were growing up, your parents encouraged you to go after the learning. The how was other parts of curiosity also rewarded, or was it more guided and pushed more towards academic pursuits?
So you would think from the stereotypes that an Asian American family would be pushing me to be as educated as possible, and they did. They do support it. It was definitely hard because, you know, this is a very immigrant perspective. They came. My parents always say this, and it's literally true and figuratively true. They came here with two blank hands. They had nothing. My dad knew no more than 12 English words when he landed here, and
Right.
they had to make
From
something out of
from where
completely
again?
nothing.
From Vietnam?
From Vietnam.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think because of that survival mode and making quite literally nothing into something, I think they're very almost beyond realistic with what careers should look like. And so in their heads, if I'm going to spend this long in school, why am I not a medical doctor? And that was their
Mm.
initial thought. Yeah. And so I think their frustration, which I fought like for years, I think their frustration and confusion was really out of protection for me, because they knew how hard it was, and they knew that I had the resources. So I had the ability to pick faster and easier than them. And honestly, in Vietnam, I mean, I think now it's evolving. But before, if you think of anyone in the mental health field, those people work in psych wards. And as we know, like psychologists, therapists, and clinicians we're not just limited to that setting. And so I think it was just lack of knowledge on their end initially, and then just fear that like you're misusing all of your resources. And so I think they know a little bit more now, especially since I started my own business, and I've been making content to hopefully appeal to many different people. And so they're more curious now.
That's good. Yeah, there are so many pieces of the people that we grew up around and the cultures that we grew up in. So much of that is based on survival. It's based on keeping us safe, and in those pieces, those parts, sometimes when they come out sideways, especially as a teenager, it's very damaging to the long term growth and inner stability. Those
Mhm.
messages are hardwired and they are hard to unwind.
Yeah.
Um, have you found that any of your clients have been challenged with letting go of some of those old tapes because of out especially because like I know for me, some of the old storylines. When I dug deeply, I realized that they were there because I felt I was going to be a disloyal daughter if I
Mm,
let go of a certain mindset, a certain way
mhm.
of behaving. Um, have you also found that with your with the or have that has that even become a thing? Is that something that shows up in your clients, or even maybe in yourself?
It's almost having them make peace with the war that's within themselves so they can finally go to work by finding out what really makes them happy, because you can't even do that while your inner self is just battling this dialogue that may or may not even exist.
Oh, that just hit me right in the chest. You said they have to learn how to stop going to war within themselves. War
Yeah.
is up so much on our planet right now. And the
Oh my
more
gosh,
people that
yes.
can be at peace within themselves, they are not
Mhm.
going to be as willing to push that out onto others.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so
Yeah.
I want everybody to have a Dr. Megan in their world.
Yeah, and I think my approach too is, again, different from what a I guess a textbook therapist would look like, right? Most therapists, they're very you keep your emotions at bay because it's not about you, it's about the client, and you don't want to muddy the waters, if you will. But I think, I mean, at least how I run my coaching, I will get angry with my client. If something upsetting happened with them, that's bad that it happened. I'm upset with you. Do we stay there? No. But I think sometimes some people need somebody in their corner, like in a genuine sense. I'll only
Mhm.
do that obviously if I feel the same way. But if I have a natural reaction of something really heart wrenching that happened with my client, I'll sit there with them in that moment. And I think that in itself is so therapeutic.
Yeah, well, and plus it's bonding between, it fosters that sense of trust that they're truly being heard, that their reaction isn't abnormal, that doesn't make them weird, that doesn't mean that you know, that they're actually valid, that they're validating that, and that's really good to hear. Um,
Mhm.
when you are So is there okay, so I'm looking think about curiosity about in your body. So for me, whenever I get real curious about something, it's like I'm almost being pulled towards, and sometimes I feel like I'm actually losing my balance because I get this almost heaviness in the chest area and the
Yeah.
stomach, and it's like, okay, I need to it's like the whole body's opening up and ready to envelop it. How about you? When you find yourself getting curious about something, where do you feel it in your body?
I feel fear and it's tense in my upper body. So maybe my limbs up here.
Okay.
And the fear is because if I'm curious, I'm going to want to dig. And if I dig and I find that, hey, there's something here, I know I'm going to go for it. And if you go for something, there's that risk of how's it going to end? So
Mm.
I go for things. I really really do. I may drag my feet a little bit, may take that anxiety in a backpack and run with it, but I'm going. And so I think curiosity is like, oh boy, where's this gonna go? Because it's gonna go somewhere.
I wonder if there's a way that fear could be released. What if you imagined right now that fear backpack? If you could maybe keep the backpack because, you gotta add some
Yeah.
tools to your toolkit, but what if we could have visualized that fear part of if as like a rock or a series of rocks, and if you could imagine letting those out, and you could just take them out and take a look at them, and maybe they don't even need to go back to whoever gave them to you. You could just leave them on the ground and let the earth absorb it. But see about how that feels just to see next time you get intrigued by something. Um, No, but that is interesting. I like what you said there, though, that there is, and there honestly there is a little bit of that fear because sometimes in order to bring something else into your world to make
Mhm.
space for it, you have to put something else down. We only
Mhm.
have 2 hands,
Right.
and you can only carry so many things. It's one of the things about receiving, I always tell people that there's always that phrase, it's better to give than receive. Well, but if you don't have anybody to give to, there you I mean, anyway,
No.
people have to be willing to receive. But curiosity for me is that, well, if I'm gonna spend my time investigating this, that takes time away from doing something else, over here. So if you're saying yes to this, what else are you saying no to?
Mm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you don't really know if the yes I if it's a valid enough yes that warrants letting go of something else that
Mhm.
you really has worked for you.
Mhm.
But you also can't evaluate that until you go at least dip your toe in a little bit. You don't necessarily need to go dive head first.
Yeah.
Although there's a good
Yeah.
question. Is there been one of those moments where you've dived in head first only to find out that, "Ooh, maybe I should have stuck with the toe?"
Had to take a deep breath on that because I think there's so many moments, and I don't think I have an answer yet for you because I'm still in
Mhm,
process. Like, I'm
mhm.
in such a transition period. If you asked me on some days, I would say my business, because there's some days I'm like, "What am I doing?" And then some days, like last night, sorry, my dog is in my dog
Oh,
is
I
part
love
of this
that
too.
your doggy back there.
Um, and then there's some days like last night where I'm like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing because I have something to offer. So I think sometimes it's I don't know. Maybe I'm still figuring it out too, and maybe in a year or two I'll have an answer for you. But I think my answer now is it comes in spurts of what am I doing? And oh yes, I am. I have something to offer in this.
Well, Megan, that's the lifespan of being an entrepreneur. Anytime you're in business for yourself, it is such a peak and valley experience, and finding that consistent forward momentum, it's hard. It's very hard. I've had my own business. I've been an active feng shui consultant and a transformational coach myself for over 20 years. And there are
Mhm.
days when I'm like, I know stuff, but this is not what I signed up for. I want to go and have all the peak experiences all the time, but
Right?
then the paperwork comes in, or then
Yes.
there's that, that inevitable breather where you're kind of
Mhm.
in between clients because, hey, you've already helped them, get to you've solved so many big problems for this certain group of people, and but because you're busy helping to help them solve that problem, there wasn't the extra marketing to bring the new ones in.
Yeah.
It is a peak and valley experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and I back to that backpack with the rocks analogy. I think so many people are so ready to dump the backpack and then just move on, but I just don't think it works like that. I think we need a little bit of weight because stress keeps us on top of our stuff.
Mhm,
It
mhm.
keeps us aware. I also think what we really need to focus on is sometimes not about dumping the rocks out, but really pulling the rocks out to really look at it. What is it? How much does it weigh? Why did I pick this up along the way of this hike?
Right.
So I think like even examining like, okay, I have to sit down. This is real true story. I have to sit down and do my expenses for last month today. Why am I anxious about this? Or why am I dragging my feet? And I think in understanding that, like the answer may surprise a lot of us.
That actually brings up a super fun little topic about curiosity, and that is, where did our money stories come from? Why is it so
Oh.
scary to look at the impact of this tool? It is money impacts all of us.
Mhm.
And I just know for me, money was really demonized There was, because again, I grew up on a farm, and talk about, feast and famine. That exactly it. The springtime was always a little bit lean because, all the extra money had to go towards buying seed. And then you plant the crop
Mm,
and you hope that the weather gods work in your favor.
mm,
And so spending any little tiny bit, even now, I get real. I have to take that deep breath, and I do. I evaluate, is this something that I really need, or is this just a want? Is this trying to fill that joy meter that, was so depleted as a child? Going to
mhm,
Disneyland was never gonna happen as a child for me. Watching a Disney movie, maybe if it was on TV and we didn't have to go to the movies for it.
mhm.
But yeah, it's I'm curious now what your thoughts are on that.
My answer is gonna be a cultural lens. I think I'm not speaking for all Asians here, I'm speaking for my family and my life. I just think money is tied into your personal value, and it's not even a value, it's almost a necessity, and lack of says so much more about you than being in abundance even. So if
Mm.
somebody is financially successful, it's almost like, okay, well, obviously, how else would you be? But if you're not what people label as financially stable or successful even, it almost says so much more that has nothing to do with actually the finances itself. And so I think because it's so ingrained in me, not being financially like there yet or like where I need to be, or even when I'm there, I want more. I think that perspective, while I'm still working on it, it's still there to be worked on.
I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing this with us on this podcast, because I do think that, because as a society, money is very important, but it's also very taboo. It's this weird push-pull relationship.
Mhm,
Um, and that's really one of the reasons why I try to talk about it just as a tool. It is not a value judgment of, or a measure of your worth as a human. It
mhm.
simply is your gives you more choices. Yeah, that's very true. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does offer you a lot of choices.
Yeah,
And when you have
does.
choices, you can make them from an easier standpoint, which again brings us back to the life coaching piece. Because I think one of, as someone who is guiding people along making a lot of these different choices that do end up leading to changes, it's all about change management. Um,
Mhm.
I think, what is one of your favorite techniques for helping people manage that change process, the decision tree that goes into, is this the right move for me or not?
Mhm. I think building 2 things. Having them understand that, and I always say this, motivation runs on momentum.
Mm,
So building that momentum while having them understand that momentum is temporary. Hence why it's so powerful. It's that oomph, right? Think if you think about like a firework, it's beautiful, it's bright, but then in
mhm.
an instant it's gone. And so as we build this momentum and get you going, like we get you off that ramp, we build up discipline in the background, because discipline is the thing that needs to be built in that silence, that day in and day out consistency. And it doesn't need to be this crazy Olympian athlete effort. But if you ask any athlete or anyone who's done anything that you're like, whoa, or worth like recording or talking about, it's the small stuff. It's nothing extraordinary that they do. Excellence is achieved when you do the same thing over and over again without giving up. And in that space of wanting to give up, that's one more step that they take of the same thing they've been doing.
Mm.
And so I think building up momentum in the forefront, but then building discipline habits in the background. I think that is what leads to not only change happening, but change that lasts.
There was Meme that I saw, and I wish I would have saved it, but I scrolled away and I couldn't find it again. But I just remember the little headline was discipline is an emotion.
Hmm.
And that kind of I've had that roll around in my head for a while. Um, but again, if you think about emotion, energy and emotion, that kind of does work with what you were just saying. That yeah, it does require the momentum to get up off the couch to go to the gym, but then once you're there, you're really happy that you're there. Okay, maybe not after the 20th burpee, but
I hate burpees, but yes.
oh, yeah, no, but I also know too that so like, I just started working out again for consistently at a gym for the first time in quite a number of years. And it's amazing to me how quickly someone can get deconditioned. Even if it's just a few
Mm.
days, you miss a few workouts, and next thing you
Yep.
know, it's like, oh my heavens, why is everything this much harder? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but again, coming back to that motivation, what are some of the I guess you have to figure out what is motivating for somebody.
Yep.
Um,
And what are the barriers? And
mm,
being real with themselves too. And that's the thing. We'll set up a weekly goal, for example, and all of my clients, patients across my training has always done this. Oh, that won't happen. I won't get distracted. Okay, because I always ask, what do you think is going to get in the way? And I even have them because everyone's like, no, we're going to do this. I'm going to do this. But as we know, change is hard. We even visualize. Okay, if you're going to sit down at that chair and do this, what do you like? The ceiling collapsing? Like we think of every scenario, not to catastrophically freak them out, but to really prepare to say, okay, how do we optimize your success here? Let's build up your success by identifying what's going to get in the way. And even thinking about when you last sat down to do this, what stopped you? Going back in time, even too.
yeah. So what's the craziest okay, not crazy, that's not the right word. What is the most creative excuse that someone has come up with as to why they thought they were not gonna be able to achieve their goal? Because I'm a proc I admit it, I have procrastination tendencies. That because, again, I grew up as believing that if I made a mistake, that that would lose the love and admiration of my teachers and parents. And so, I've got this high bar of perfectionism, and when I can't do something perfectly, I procrastinate because, why avoid the pain of not doing something perfectly?
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of my shiny object syndrome really um, got honed, and I've been working through that one, myself for a long time. So that's kind of my, 'cause, that I had to get really curious about, why is it that I would create so many of those little barriers. So how about you, and or some of your clients? What are some of their more creative ways of tricking them into believing that their goal is not attainable?
I think the funniest excuses or the funniest comments are always the simplest ones that I'm like, you didn't even think about this answer. And I had a client repeat that, like, because so I said, okay, so I had you do like X goal. What do you think got in the way? And they said, well, my partner was asleep. And I'm like, what? Help me understand how that, you know. And they're like, well, they were supposed to let me use their Google account. And I'm like, okay, I want you to write down exactly what you just told me. Like, write it down on a piece of paper and read it to yourself. And the funny thing is, saying it out loud didn't strike a cue for them. But when they wrote it, they're like, oh, that does sound kind of silly, huh? And it's almost like the justifications that have no like connection. It doesn't make any sense. Like how we put this almost like if we can't handle the stress or like this procrastination, we put it onto somebody else to say, well, my partner was supposed to be there to do what? And I even like ask follow up questions to say, were they supposed to help you write this cover letter? Or they're like, oh, um, no, it was on their computer. Where's the computer? In the living room. Do you have access to the living room? Yeah. that's how our mind works. It is psychs ourselves out. We psych ourselves out so much that it's almost silly. And I think just again validating it, make even laughing at the situation. I'm like, do you hear how silly this sounds? And and just having this laughing moment to be like, okay, so when I asked you what's going to get in the way, there's a reason why. Because I've seen this time and again. And I think people really need to hear that they're not all that unique. I know that sounds really like backwards, but we're not that unique in the struggles that we have. And thinking that our problems are so unique and that we're so special to be the only one anxious and putting this off. No, 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 no. You're not alone.
I I really like that breakdown that you just did. That this is someone that and that it is so much easier to blame others for really things that sometimes those I have to admit, sometimes things really are out of your control.
Yeah.
There truly are those times, like maybe if the computer had been in the bedroom and their partner was asleep and they had just come off an overnight shift and really desperately needed their sleep, then I could see that that would be a more valid excuse. Except that you could have had, left a note to say, "Can you please leave the computer, move the computer in and put it in the living room so I can use
Mhm.
that." Um, th- I what would you say the percentages of people putting their um, indecision off onto other people?
I would say 50-50.
You think so?
Yeah. I think about half, again, I'm looking at not just only my coaching clients, but even patients at any age. I would say probably about half, and then the rest would have like different personal reasons of like I got distracted or I was too anxious. Um, but it always comes down to the same answer as to why they didn't do it. It's almost the fear of not even failing at doing it, but the fear of if they do get it done, what happens next? It's interesting, right?
Yeah. Wow. Like, what if I do this and it works?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like I wrote the cover letter, but I almost didn't want to send it to you because if it's submitted, what if they interview me? Isn't that what we wanted? But wait a minute. Them interviewing means that's another hurdle. Now it's real. Now, if I interview, they can say no to my face. Or now that I interview, I may want it
And then they say no to your face, and then you're left with the disappointment.
in a cover letter.
Yeah.
And that's what they said. They're like, what do I have left? Just this cover letter? And I said, yes, it's just you, the rejection, and the cover letter. And you know what? You're going to take that cover letter and go to another job because now you have tools.
Hmm. I I like how you are so calm and approaching that, and yet firm. You're that nice combination of velvet, the velvet switch.
Velvet switch. Yeah, again, I'm not a typical therapist. Like I will straight up say, okay, oh, you didn't do your homework. That sucks. Talk about this. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. We're gonna talk about this now, right? And again, I think I'm very soft, as you said, but at the same time, I'm straight shot of tequila.
But do you
If
have
you
the
want
worm?
to know, oh yeah, I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think you do the worm part. Ew.
Hey, people
Oh.
always again like not many people understand like the difference between therapy and coaching, and even they don't even know what each of it is. But coaching, at least, is not somebody warm and fuzzy giving you advice or just your buddy that you vent to. You know what I mean? Like that's what grandparents are for. You want to get stuff done? I'm your person.
Wonderful. Well, Megan, do you have any special offers or any advice on how people can get started working with you? And do you only see people in person?
I do both. So I do one-on-one coaching, which can be online or in person. Half of my caseload I actually see in person just because of the different things that we're working on. I also do wellness workshops and talks for different corporate settings, community health clinics, and just different organizations. And that's been another curious journey for me, is that I've always loved education. I've always taught, either been a TA or worked in research and helped mentor. But this has been I've been able to teach and share knowledge in a different way through these workshops. So that's been fun too. But yeah, I see clients both in person and virtually for many different concerns. But the caseload that I have right now is people from many walks of life, many chapters, many age ranges, and all of them come to a point of what's next for me and how do
Yeah.
I get there? So that's what I do. But how to get started with me is, of course, checking out my website, goldensheeplifecoaching.com. But even more so, checking out my Instagram page, which sounds really silly. Sorry. But I post little medical minutes on there. Sorry, I didn't know if the audio lost.
No, yeah, we didn't lose the audio. It's still there.
But my Instagram page, where I post like little snippets of videos where you can get like almost an appetizer of what I sound like, my approaches, and explaining things, a little bit of what I know. So I think that would be a really great start there.
So your Instagram is it just Instagram, or do you also post on TikTok?
I'm everywhere, but find me on Instagram. That's the place that I know what I'm doing the most. Because Twitter is no longer Twitter, it's X, so that's unsettling. And then there's Facebook, which I don't, yeah. So, and then TikTok is just, I think I'm too old for TikTok, but Instagram is a nice middle. TikTok is just too much. It's too fast, too much.
Okay. I'm laughing because I have so many people telling me that, oh, you need to be on TikTok. And I'm like, if you're saying that you're too old to be on TikTok, Megan, what? I guess, but I guess they do need that grandparenty type, not that I'm that old. I'm barely, I don't know, I'm old enough to be a grandparent, but that's okay. I don't need to be.
Maybe you'll
Um,
like it. Who knows? Who knows? But I like the visual aspect of Instagram more.
yeah. Okay.
Um,
But it's under
yeah.
the Golden Sheep Life Coaching as well on
Yes.
Instagram. Yeah, it sounds like, okay,
Yes.
so you've got everything consistent throughout it. So, okay.
Yes.
Well, in the show notes, I'll make sure that I have that listed there. And if there's any other, um, like any other kind of specials, are you doing any kind, so you say you're doing more corporate things. Is that also the same thing for business owners who are listening and want to look at how you could come in and help them? Are you doing like more with teams, helping teams figure out how to understand each other better? Or is it more kind of like a general overview for the businesses?
Any and all. The last 3 talks that I did was over how to navigate change you didn't ask for, and just stress management, compassion fatigue. And so I handle my talks as I do individual clients. We have a first free consult where you and I will meet and discuss what the needs are. What questions do you want answered, and how do I approach it in my specialty, right? Like, I'm not a business coach in any way. I'm not going to be talking to you about how to run a corporation, but I do know my clinical skills. And I know how to talk about stress and the brain and the neurobiology behind it and how it's applicable to your daily life. So that's what we do, is sit down and talk about, okay, what are the questions? This is what I can offer, and collaboratively, how do we present this information in a way that's applicable and relevant to your employees? So, like, I'll give you an example. One of the community health clinics in Austin that I'm doing talks for, I reached out to be able to provide services for their patients. And they replied to me saying, you know what? Our providers need so much support. Is there a way you can tailor the talk to them? And I said, absolutely. I just finished training. I know the struggle is so real. I get it. I get it. And so I've been doing talks for their staff and admin.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
and I just did a talk for them over compassion fatigue. And some people even said, honestly, we never even knew that there was a terminology for what we felt. And that's compassion fatigue. We care so much, but so little at the same time. So, so that's really what I do. And even on the one-on-one coaching aspect, it's the same thing. We get to know you again, how I can help you, and mapping out what our time together will look like. Because I think a good coach at the end of the day, is somebody that is supposed to be gone by the end of the time. If I'm successful, you should have tools to use for the rest of your
When you're successful, not if.
life. Fingers crossed.
Well,
But
and
yes,
like any tool, sometimes they need to be upgraded. Sometimes they need to be cleaned and sharpened or whatever. But wow, well, this has been wonderful, Megan. I'm so happy we had this time together. And for anybody, again, I'll put that information in the bottom, but goldensheeplifecoaching.com to talk with Dr. Megan. And of course, beverlybeal.com is where you're going to find any of the information about my own personal blend of coaching. But the way I approach it, it's more from an energy standpoint. And that's a different kettle of fish than what Megan, what you are offering. You definitely have the more science-based things. Um, in the ideal world, people could come talk to me about getting some of the energetic pieces handled, and then I would send them on to Megan to help really ground things into their day-to-day lives. And that's one of the things that I think we might end up actually doing something like that in the future. So stay tuned. Anyway, well, thanks again so much, Megan, for coming and for taking the time. We'll hopefully find another option to dissect and explore down the road.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Beverly, for having me. It was great chatting with you. And obviously, off screen, we'll keep chatting and thinking about different creative projects for 2024.
Yes, we're gonna have a lot. All right. Talk to you later.
All right, bye.